goes away in his glorification, in his return to the Father, he comes back to them in his resurrection. This is kind of a different way of understanding and imagining this mystery. Remember when Jesus is talking to Martha, and he says, "I am the resurrection"? He doesn't say, "I'm going to be raised from the dead." He doesn't say, "I am the risen one." John's emphasis is on the meaning of the Lord's glorification in the life of believers. And in the life of believers, he indwells. He's not just, his description is not just something that happened to Jesus. It's to tell us what happens to us. John is going to tell the story of Easter in the reaction of a series of encounters with different people. Peter, the beloved disciple, Mary Magdalene, the disciples, and Thomas. And they all react differently. They all respond to the Lord on a different level of faith, of belief, of trust. The first story, which has to do with Peter and the beloved disciple and Mary Magdalene, the first part of this telling, the first part is around the question, where is the Lord? That's what Mary Magdalene comes running back from the empty tomb, and she says, they've stolen him, they've taken him, and we don't know where they've put him. The first part of that John is concerned with is, where is he? And it's sort of the question that keeps coming up in John's gospel over and over again. Remember when those two guys right at the beginning of the gospel, they hear John the Baptist say, "There's the Lamb of God," and they go trailing after Jesus. They're kind of stalking him a little bit, and Jesus turns around and catches them following, and they get shook, and they say, "Where do you live? Where do you dwell? Where do you remain?" It's the first question of the disciples in the gospel, and it keeps coming up. John tells the story of Jesus when his enemies don't know where he came from, and they don't know where he's going, kind of in the 8th chapter. And then later Jesus says, "Where I'm going, you can't come." But later, talking to the disciples, you can. At the Last Supper, where Jesus is going becomes another question. When he says, "I'm going away," and you know where I'm going. And Thomas says, "No, we don't know where you're going." So that's Mary Magdalene's first question. She goes to the tomb, and the body's not there, and so she starts asking, where is the Lord? We already know, if we've read the first part of the gospel, the Word was with God. The only Son, God, who is in the bosom of the Father. That's where he is. He comes into the world to give power to become the children of God. He departs to enter back into his glory, the glory he had with the Father before the world was created. Then he returns to initiate the disciples into that glory. Mary Magdalene runs back to the disciples when she can't find Jesus, and Peter and the disciple whom Jesus loved go chasing, running to the tomb. The disciple whom Jesus loved, most of us say, well, that's John. But that's not what John says. This guy only shows up in the second half of the gospel. He's never equated in the gospel with the son of Zebedee. He shows up at the Last Supper. He's the closest one to Jesus. He shows up in the high priest's courtyard with Peter. He shows up at the cross with Jesus' mother. The other gospels never mention him. He's the invisible guy. He's got no name. He's got no place. He's just the disciple. He's just the disciple whom Jesus loved. And in John's community, he has a special place. Throughout the latter part of the gospel, there's this contrast between Peter, who has a name, who has a place, who has a role, who's the center of the 12, and the disciple who has no name and no place and nothing to tell us anything about him except that Jesus loved him. Hang on to that, because that's key in the gospel. Peter and the disciple, made the mistake. Peter and the disciple both run to the tomb. They both see what's in there. No body, burial cloths put to one side, and the face covering rolled up and put at another place. That's a hint right there that this is no grave robbery. If they'd stolen the body of Jesus, they wouldn't have unwrapped it. Something's going on here. Peter sees only that the body's gone. He's sort of standing there scratching his head. He's uncomprehending. He doesn't know what's going on. The gospel says that the disciple sees and believes. Right then. He believes. How could he believe? He sees a sign that Peter missed. The face cloth, folded up, rolled up, put aside. The face cloth that Jesus doesn't need anymore. The burial clothes that are left back there because he's not going to need them anymore. There's an echo here. Remember the story of Moses when he met God on the mountain and he got sunburned by the glory of God, so much so that his face was shining and nobody could look at him? So what did he do? He put over his head a face cloth. He covered the glory so that he could talk to people. Jesus' glory is no longer veiled. It's not veiled by his humanity. It's not veiled by the scandal of the cross. He doesn't need the veil anymore. He doesn't need the face cloth. He's in glory with the Father, just like he told them. So he leaves it behind. The beloved disciple, believes because he sees the sign. Neither he nor Peter comprehend the resurrection. They don't know what it is yet. But the beloved disciple knows that Jesus is in glory, just like he said he would be when he returned to the Father. He's been exalted. He's been lifted up. He's been glorified. The gospel ends the story by saying they did not yet understand the resurrection because they haven't seen Jesus. But the beloved disciple believes before he sees. Hang on to that. The first part of this John story is an answer to the question, where's the Lord? Jesus is glorified. He's in God. He has returned to the Father. He's repossessed the glory he had with God before the creation of the world, just like he said at the Last Supper. The second part of the answer is now that where he is he's going to return to his own. I'm going away, he said, but I'm coming back. The resurrection, this is his return to his own, where he reveals in the encounter, which he reveals in his encounter with Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene shows up in all the gospel accounts. She is the first one at the tomb. Women are the witnesses to the death and the burial and the empty tomb in all the Gospels. But historically, Mary Magdalene kind of gets put aside. The men become the official witnesses, and the women, whom the other Gospels say nobody believed, they kind of get put to the side. The first appearance in Luke's community is to Peter. In Paul's community, the Gentile community, the one that counts is Paul. In the Jerusalem community, it's to James. But in John's community, it's Mary Magdalene. The glorified Jesus entrusts the Easter good news to Mary Magdalene. She is the apostolic witness to the church and to us. The Eastern Church always called her the apostle to the apostles. Pope Francis has updated our feast, and that's now her title in the Western Church on her feast day. In John's Gospel, they believe her testimony, different than the other Gospels, who don't trust the women at all. This part of the story starts in the dark. Mary Magdalene is in the dark. That's always John's symbol for lack of faith, not understanding, without light, in the dark. And it starts in a garden. John is the only one who says that Jesus' tomb was in a garden. That should have an echo in your head already. The first garden, Eden. Jesus is the new Adam. Jesus is the creator of a new creation. There's also an echo of the Song of Songs. Mary is looking for her beloved, just like the beloved in the Song of Songs is searching in a garden for her beloved. All these echoes John means you to hear. He won't hit you over the head with them, but you should hear them in the background. Mary is just absolutely distraught. She's weeping. She's fixated on the loss of the body of Jesus. So much so, if you notice, that when she sees the angel, she's not even surprised. She's so fixated on the loss. The two angels are sitting on either end of the sepulcher, which is another echo. The two seraphim that are on either side of the seat of mercy over the Ark of the Covenant, the presence of God, the glory of God dwells there. Mary didn't see any of it. She's just seeking Jesus. She's seeking the body of Jesus. She's blinded by her grief. So much so then she turns around, not paying much attention to the angels, and sees the guy in back of her and thinks he's the gardener. She's looking straight at Jesus. She doesn't recognize him. Jesus is the gardener. He's the new Adam. This is the new world. This is the garden of the eighth day. The fact that he's the gardener, the fact that he's Adam, should make you remember what happens to Jesus on the cross. When he's lifted up, the last thing that happens to him before his death is that his side is opened. Just like Adam's side was opened, and out of that came a whole new family, Eve and the rest of us. So when his side is open, out comes blood and water all over those at the foot of the cross. His mother and his disciple, his new community, his new family, his new creation. That's all going in the background. Jesus asked her the recurring question of the gospel: whom do you seek? It's the opening question of Jesus to those two guys that tagged along with him at the beginning of the gospel. When they get caught following him, Jesus turns around and, what are you looking for? It's the same question he asked the mob in the Garden of Gethsemane when they came after him. Whom do you seek? In fact, he asked it twice. Mary is looking for a body. That's why she doesn't recognize Jesus. She's still fixated on the old mode of Jesus' presence, his physical, historical presence. She doesn't recognize the risen Jesus. But then in one verse, it all turns around. Jesus says, Mary. He calls her by name. And then she knows him. And then John says, turning, she said to him, Rabboni, which means teacher. She already turned around. She's staring straight at him, and then John says, turning, she said, Rabboni. It's not a physical turning. This is conversion. She sees him, she turns toward him, she claims him, she names him. But she uses his old name, teacher. She's still kind of hanging on to the past. And that's when she grabs him. She's not going to let him go. She is going to pull him into her present. She recognizes Jesus not by what she sees, but by what she hears. Her name, Jesus, the Good Shepherd, calling his own by name, just like he told them way back when. Jesus then says, stop holding on to me. Let go of me. It's almost as he's kind of giving her the kick. Apparently because she's hanging on for dear life. She doesn't want to let him go. She's not going to lose him again. And she's still back there. So Jesus moves from this prohibition to a command. Don't hang on to me, go to my brothers. The prohibition is don't hang on to the past, but now go where you can hang on to me, in the community of my disciples. Then John has this kind of difficult line. I'm going to my Father. I'm ascending to my Father. Well, he's already said that Jesus is glorified. He's gone to God. He's completed his mission. So maybe that's a statement of where he is already. But maybe it's also a question. Greek has no question marks, so the words can kind of mean the same thing. Maybe it's, am I not ascended to my Father? And the answer would be, yeah, you're ascended. You're lifted up. You're glorified. It all happened on the cross. The main point now, though, is Jesus wants to send Mary to the locus of his presence now. He sent to my brothers. And he calls them brothers for the first time, just like in Luke, I believe. There's a whole new relationship between him and the disciples. And then he says, I'm going to my God and your God, my Father and your Father. The Word that was made flesh came to bring power so that we could become the children of God. That possibility is now open. With Jesus glorified, everyone can become, in this whole new creation, the children of God. And so she is sent to announce that good news. Not just that Jesus has been raised, not just that he goes ahead of you to Galilee. She's saying more. She announces to the disciples that it's all done. It's all accomplished. The work of the Word made flesh is complete. And the fruits of that work are now available to those who believe in him. John's echoing the very beginning of his gospel. The Word became flesh to give power to become children of God to those who believe in him, right in the first chapter. And it echoes Jesus' words on the cross, his last words, the very last thing he shouts out on the cross. It's accomplished. It's finished. In Latin, it's consummatum est, which is what the centurion would shout out at the end of a battle. It's over. It's done. You get to go home. Consummatum est. It is finished. That's what she's announcing to the disciples. So once John has established where Jesus is in the glory of the Father, now he says, how does Jesus come back to his disciples, and how is he present to them? I don't know where the time is now. Are we anywhere over? 5 minutes? Well, I'll go fast. The trouble with John is he's too deep. He's had 60 years to think about this stuff, so it gets layer upon layer. And there's always more. There's always more there to contemplate. Jesus comes back to the disciples Easter Sunday night. That's kind of in connection with all the traditions. Although the little bit of difference is that the disciples have believed Mary. They've trusted the news that Jesus is glorified, but they're still fearful. They still got the doors locked. They don't know the whole thing yet. Jesus says, peace to you. It's a declaration. It's not peace be with you. It's peace to you. It's echo what he promised, that peace is my farewell to you. My peace is my gift to you. I will come back to you. And then he identifies himself. He shows him his hands. He shows him his side. It's only the wound in the side is only in John's gospel. And it's his other promise he made at the Last Supper. You're sad now, but I'll see you again, and your hearts will rejoice, which is exactly what the disciples do. They see that this is Jesus, and this is the Lord. That's as close as John ever gets to saying the disciples believe in him. But it's enough. They're filled with joy. The disciples believe because they are filled with joy, because they identify Jesus with the Lord. And then he sends them. Just like Mark and Matthew and Luke. But there's a little bit of twist in John. It isn't just go and make disciples of all the world, baptize them and teach them. It's the Father has sent me, so I send you. That's always the paradigm in John. The Father sends the Son sends the disciples. Jesus images the Father, so the disciples have to image Jesus. They are sent to do and be Jesus in the world. to bring light and truth and life, so that whoever sees the disciples will see Jesus, just like whoever saw Jesus would see the Father, which is a bigger challenge than just go teach other people or just go tell them something. This you have to dwell in the Lord in order to give the good news. And then he breathes on them, which is another echo. In Genesis, how does God make his little mud man into a living being? He breathes into him. On the cross, the way John says Jesus died is he handed over his breath. He handed over his spirit. It all happens on the cross. Jesus is exalted, lifted up, glorified. He creates a new family, and he breathes out his spirit on them. Death, resurrection, ascension, glorification, Pentecost. In John's gospel, it all happens on the cross. So Jesus does this again. He breathes on his new community and creates a new humanity. And then he connects that breath, that command, that commission with forgiving sins. Just like the Baptist said, that the Lamb of God is going to take away the sins of the world. That job of taking away the sins of the world is handed on to his new family, to his disciples. Job number one out of Easter is to forgive. Not to judge, not to do anything else. Number one job is to bring forgiveness to the world. The last scene in his story is a week later, on the 8th day, on the second Sunday. By the time of John is writing, that first day of the week is known as the Lord's Day. The doors are still locked. Even after meeting the risen Lord, the disciples are still afraid, which I've always suspected is one of the reasons Thomas doesn't believe anything they're saying. There's been no change. They're still locked up in the room. After all the Gospels tell about the disciples doubting after Easter, but John is the most dramatic one. He personalizes that doubt in Thomas. It's the same story again. Jesus appears in their midst. He says, "Peace be with you." And then he points at Thomas. He starts probing Thomas, who had said he wanted to probe the hands and the side of Jesus. And there's two invitations that Jesus probes him with: to put his fingers into the nail marks and his side, or to quit his disbelief and become a believer. It isn't both and, it's either or, if you read it carefully. All our pictures of the doubting Thomas have him sticking his hand in his side. The way John tells it, Jesus says, okay, come on, put your hands here, or believe. And Thomas believes. The great irony of John's story is that the one who doubted the most gives the strongest and the most profound expression of faith in the whole gospel. He says, "My Lord and my God." Circles right back to the beginning of the gospel. The Word was God. And Jesus praises him. You are blessed. That would have been a great place to end the gospel, with Thomas giving the best thing anybody could say about Jesus, the greatest profession of faith. You've already had the disciple whom Jesus loved believed when he saw the signs. You already had Mary Magdalene believe when she heard her name, when she knew she was called by name by the one who loved her. You already have the disciples who believed when they saw and recognized Jesus as the Lord. And you have Thomas, who believed when he was challenged by the Lord to go deeper, to probe deeper. But John doesn't end there. Jesus ends the gospel by praising those who have believed without seeing garments or bodily presence or wounds. Just as there's no greater praise that's ever been given to Jesus in the Gospels as the admission that you are my Lord and my God, there's no greater praise can be given to any of Jesus' followers than blessed are those who have not seen and yet believed. Who believed in these stories before they saw? The disciple whom Jesus loved, the beloved disciple, the guy without a name, the guy who has no place, no rank, except that he's loved. The disciple who maybe is you. With that profession of faith and that beatitude, blessed are they who have not seen and yet believed, John ends his gospel. And he adds a note. The whole gospel was written that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through this belief you may have life in his name. Homework. Sometime this week, spend a little time with the epilogue of John's Gospel, chapter 21. We didn't even touch it. It's a completely different Easter story, but it still follows John's pattern of telling the story through people, through their encounters, the beloved disciple and Peter in this connection. Pay attention to how they encounter Jesus. Pay attention to what happens with them. Pay attention to what Jesus says about them. Read, reread, let it get from your head, all this stuff I kind of talk about, to your heart. From meditating on it to praying, to talking to the Lord himself. If you have all kinds of time this week, you can read the first 2 chapters of the Acts of the Apostles. We'll try to talk a little bit about Ascension and Pentecost next week to wrap up the Easter stories. I'm done. My presumption is you are too. There is a mic there if somebody has a question, or it's Cinco de Mayo and the margaritas are waiting. Thank you very much. We'll see you later.